Welcome back to the Deep Dive, the place where we unpack complex information and try and make it really useful for you.
Great to be here.
Today, we're diving into something super practical. It's the COBIT 2019 Implementation Guide.
That's right. We've talked about the main COBIT framework before, the principles, the overall structure for governing and managing enterprise INT or EGID.
Yeah.
But this guide, this is the how-to. It's really about taking those concepts off the page and making them work in the real world inside your organization. Less what, more how.
And for this deep dive, we're going to zoom right in on chapters 4 and 5. Think of us maybe as your guides through these specific parts of the manual.
Sounds good, like instructors walking through the key sections.
Exactly. So chapter 4. It gets right into the nitty-gritty of the common challenges, the hurdles that organizations typically face when they try to implement these EGID improvements.
And crucially, it also covers the success factors. What actually helps you overcome those challenges. It's kind of like getting a heads up on all the potential roadblocks you might hit.
Right, a bit of foresight. And then chapter 5.
Chapter 5 shifts focus to something that chapter 4 keeps highlighting as absolutely vital: change enablement.
The people side.
Exactly, the human element. This is where the guide really tackles the behavioral stuff, the cultural aspects, the organizational dynamics, all the things that can honestly make or break any kind of improvement effort, especially something like governance.
Because let's face it, you can sit down and design the most beautiful, logical governance process ever on paper. But if the people who actually have to use it don't get it, or maybe they don't buy into why it's needed, or they just, don't actually change how they do their work, then that perfect process is just, well, it's just paper, isn't it?
Pretty much useless. It's all about getting people to think differently, to work differently, to actually get the value from INT that the governance is supposed to enable.
So we'll kind of follow the guide's own structure here.
Yeah.
Walk through the topics as they appear in chapters 4 and 5.
Yeah, sequentially. We'll explain the core ideas, pull out the key insights, and pay attention to how the guide connects these challenges and the change activities back to that implementation life cycle it talks about.
Okay, perfect. So let's unpack this. Let's see what practical wisdom we can pull from these 2 chapters for anyone out there who's wrestling with making EG improvements actually stick in their company. Let's maybe start with chapter 4, looking at where things often go wrong.
Sounds like a plan. So chapter 4, identifying challenges and success factors. The intro sets the stage right away. It says, look, implementing EG, it's not simple.
No kidding.
You have to create the right environment for it to even have a chance. And that means, active direction from management, real support, oversight.
So not just passive agreement.
Definitely not. The guide points out that a lack of this active, supportive environment is a huge reason why so many INT initiatives, especially governance ones, just fizzle out. They don't hit their goals or the changes don't last.
You end up with policies on a shelf somewhere.
Exactly. Policies, procedures, they exist on paper, maybe in a binder, but nobody really owns them. Nobody follows them consistently. They don't actually change anything.
And the guide connects this idea of the right environment back to that 7-phase implementation life cycle, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. That life cycle is like the project plan for making an EGI improvement happen.
Yeah.
It goes all the way from figuring out why you even need to change.
Phase 1, the drivers.
Right. All the way through planning, implementing, and then crucially, making sure those changes actually stick around for the long haul.
And chapter 4 uses that same structure.
It does. It organizes the challenges and the success factors according to those phases. So as you're going through your own implementation, you can kind of see, okay, we're in phase 2 now. What problems does the guide say are common right here?
That's really useful, almost like a troubleshooting guide in advance.
Yeah, pretty much. It outlines the typical challenges phase by phase, then digs into the root causes like why do these things keep happening? And then it gives you the success factors, which are basically the countermeasures, the things you need to do to get past those specific hurdles in that particular phase.
Perfect. Let's follow that structure then. Let's start with phase 1. What are the drivers? This is right at the beginning, identifying the triggers. Maybe it's a new rule, a big project failure, a strategic goal.
Yeah.
What are the main challenges the guide says you hit right out of the gate here?
Okay, so for phase 1, the guide points to like 2 main things, 2 big challenges.
Yeah.
First, and this is a big one, just not getting that senior management buy-in.
Yeah.
That real commitment, that visible support.
Right. If the leadership isn't truly behind it.
It's tough. And the second challenge they list is, well, it's difficulty showing the value, the tangible benefits of better governance right at the start.
Demonstrating those benefits early on, when maybe they seem a bit abstract.
Exactly. You're trying to justify the effort, maybe ask for resources, but the payoff might feel distant or hard to quantify at this stage.
So it really boils down to getting the why accepted and properly supported right up at the top levels. Why are these such common problems in phase one? What are the root causes the guide digs into?
Oh, the root causes listed here are really, really insightful. They go way beyond just management doesn't get it, for instance.
Yeah.
There's often just a fundamental lack of understanding or maybe just no solid evidence presented about why better governance is actually important or urgent or valuable to the whole business, not just, an IT thing.
So making that business case clear.
Right. Then there's the issue of not allocating resources up front. No budget, no people assigned properly. It's hard to get momentum.
Starting off starved.
Pretty much. Another big one is a poor understanding of what EJ actually is. People often confuse governance, the directing and monitoring part, with management, the day-to-day planning, building, running stuff.
Mixing up those levels.
Yeah, and that leads to confusion about who's responsible for what. Then there's the fact that sometimes the whole initiative is just a reaction.
Like to a crisis, a security breach, or a bad audit.
Exactly. A short-term fix, not a thought-out, proactive strategy for improvement. And those reactive things often lose steam once the immediate fire is out.
Makes sense.
Past failures also play a huge role. If the organization's seen other big IT projects or change initiatives crash and burn,
People get cynical. Here we go again.
precisely. There's concern about another project likely to fail, and maybe a lack of trust specifically in IT management's ability to deliver.
Ouch.
Then there's just poor communication, not clearly explaining the governance issues or the potential benefits in a way the business understands. The value proposition is fuzzy, the timelines are unclear.
Just not selling it well.
Right. And sometimes it's as simple or maybe as complicated as not having a senior executive who's willing to put their name on it, to be the sponsor, and more importantly, to be accountable for its success.
Someone has to own it at that level.
Absolutely. Other root causes. Maybe a poor perception of IT's overall credibility in the business. The CIO might not be seen as a strategic partner. Or the mistaken belief among executives that EGIDE is just IT's problem to solve. They don't see how it connects to overall enterprise governance.
It gets siloed.
Yeah. Not having the right team with the right mix of skills, business, IT, governance, know-how. Not using recognized frameworks like COBIT itself, or maybe not enough training, positioning the initiative incorrectly within the existing company governance structures.
So it doesn't integrate properly.
Right. And sometimes it's driven by, let's say, enthusiastic converts, people who love the framework.
The textbook preachers.
Kind of, yeah. They might advocate for generic solutions without really tailoring them enough to the specific company culture and context.
Wow, okay. That's a comprehensive list of potential landmines right at the start. It's not just one or two things. It's this whole web of issues: leadership, communication, trust, resources, understanding.
It really highlights the complexity, doesn't it?
Definitely. So given all those potential pitfalls in phase one, what does the guide suggest? How do you actually navigate that? What are the success factors for this initial stage?
Well, the success factors the guide provides are really aimed squarely at tackling those root causes we just talked about, especially the leadership and the value communication bits.
Okay.
It suggests things like working to make EG a regular standing item on the agenda for the board, and for key committees, like the audit committee, the risk committee.
Get it on their radar consistently.
Exactly. It signals that this is important stuff. Another key thing is to use real, tangible issues the business already cares about. Compliance problems, performance issues, maybe recent incidents.
Things that have caused pain.
Right. Use those to highlight the concrete risks of having poor governance.
Okay.
Connect it directly to things those board-level executives are already accountable for.
Make it relevant to them.
Absolutely. The guide also says to actively involve your auditors, both internal and external. Seek their input, get their guidance. They often have a good, independent perspective on governance weaknesses and can really help make the case for change.
Leverage their credibility.
Yeah. And importantly, right from this early stage, start thinking about the culture change needed. Acknowledge the human element up front. What shifts in mindset or behavior will be necessary down the road? Plan for it early.
Don't wait until you hit resistance later.
Exactly. Also, don't be afraid to raise the issue directly with the CEO and the board. It needs that executive visibility and sponsorship.
Get you right to the top.
And finally, ensure risk management is seen as an enterprise-wide thing, not just IT risk. Position I&T risks within that broader business risk context.
Okay, so the overwhelming theme here seems to be securing that genuine, active, top-level commitment and visibility right from day one. It's not optional, is it?
Not according to this guide. Without that active sponsorship and direction, getting the resources you need, getting cooperation across different business units, driving adoption later on, it's just going to be incredibly difficult. It's pretty much non-negotiable for phase 1 success.
Got it. Okay, so let's move on. Chapter 4 then looks at the next chunk of phases together. Phase 2, where are we now? And phase 3, where do we want to be?
Right, the assessment and definition
Yeah.
phases. Understanding your current state and then defining that target future state for EG.
What kind of challenges tend to crop up during this part of the process, according to the guide?
Well, once you get into the nitty-gritty of assessing how things are now and defining where you want to go, the challenges shift a bit. They become more about collaboration, communication, and relevance. Things like struggling to gain and then keep the support for the specific improvement objectives as you start nailing them down. Initial enthusiasm might wane.
Maintaining momentum.
Yeah. That persistent communication gap between IT and the business often becomes really apparent here, making mutual understanding difficult when you need it most.
Getting everyone on the same page.
Exactly. And then there's the real difficulty often faced in getting the business to participate meaningfully in these activities. Assessment and definition absolutely need business input, but getting their time and attention can be tough.
They're busy with their day jobs.
Right. Also, just identifying all the relevant stakeholders and role players across the company who need to be involved or consulted, it can be hard to map that out.
Finding everyone who has a stake.
A lack of business insight among IT management themselves can be a barrier. If IT folks can't speak the business language or understand their perspective, collaboration suffers.
Need that business acumen in IT.
Definitely. Other challenges include maybe just not having clear current enterprise policies or strategic direction that the EG effort should align with, or generally weak overall enterprise governance, making it harder to implement stronger IT governance within that context.
It's hard to build on a shaky foundation.
Exactly. And then there's that issue of trust or lack thereof. If there are already strained relationships between IT and the business, maybe due to past IT performance issues, it makes this kind of collaborative assessment and definition really difficult.
Old wounds impacting the present.
Yeah. And finally, the feeling or the perception that the cost and effort involved in the improvements being defined just outweighs the benefits that people are seeing.
The value proposition isn't landing. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. You need that deep collaboration for assessment and definition. But if the communication isn't there, or the trust isn't there, or people don't see the point, you're going to hit these walls. What does the guide say are the root causes for these particular challenges in phases 2 and 3?
Well, buckle up because there's another significant list here.
Okay, bring it on.
It really drills down, for instance. Maybe those compelling reasons to act. The drivers from phase 1 just weren't articulated clearly enough or didn't resonate deeply enough to keep people engaged as the work got harder. Or the benefits were articulated, but they just don't seem compelling enough to justify the investment of time and effort required from stakeholders. People might be worried about losing productivity or efficiency while the change process is happening. There's often a lack of clear accountability who specifically is responsible for sponsoring or committing to the objectives being defined in these phases. Maybe the formal structures needed for business involvement in EGITE just don't exist at the strategic level, tactical level, operational level. Using the wrong communication methods, maybe messages are too technical, too long, not put in simple business terms. EGI just isn't seen as a priority by business execs because it's not tied to their KPIs, their performance measures. Sometimes IT management actually prefers to work in isolation, maybe to hide issues, maybe it's just the existing culture. Existing barriers, real or perceived, between IT and the business just get in the way of participation. No clearly defined roles and responsibilities for how the business should be involved in EG processes. Key individuals in the business, especially maybe those informal influencers, aren't engaged. Business executives might just have a limited understanding of what good EG actually does for them, what the value is. Weak overall corporate governance can contribute to IT leadership lacking business insight. IT leadership might have a purely technical background, not involved enough in the bigger business picture. IT management might be isolated, not sitting at the senior tables where key decisions are made. There might be no formal business relationship management process connecting IT and the business units. That legacy of poor IT performance we mentioned, it can put IT in a defensive mode, making them reluctant to be fully transparent during the "where are we now" assessment. The CIO or IT management might feel vulnerable and unwilling to expose internal weaknesses. Just general issues with commitment or leadership, maybe reflecting a lower level of organizational maturity around governance overall. An autocratic leadership style might clash with the collaborative nature needed for these phases. A company culture that prizes free thinking and informal approaches might resist the structure that governance implies. Weak enterprise risk management overall makes it hard to position IT risks effectively. Legacy issues from past IT problems keep impacting trust and perception. The scope and expectations for the EG initiative might not have been managed well from the start. Unclear governance roles in the business can lead to them just abdicating decisions about INT. Lack of good data or metrics showing the business need for improvement. Sometimes it's just general resistance. People don't like being proven wrong or are just uncomfortable with change. Focusing the assessment and definition only on controls and performance, and forgetting to highlight the efficiency or innovation benefits that might resonate more with business folks. Maybe the overall program plan is poorly phased, not clearly linking costs and benefits at each stage. Trying to define complex, expensive solutions first instead of building momentum with easier wins. And a really practical one, ED's budget, and people are already swamped just keeping the lights on, leaving very little appetite or capacity for EG work.
Okay, wow. That is an exhaustive list. And again, so many of those root causes are really deep organizational things, cultural things, way beyond just IT's domain, aren't they?
Absolutely. It hammers home that EG improvement is truly an enterprise effort, not just something IT does on the side.
So, given that mountain of potential root causes, what does the guide offer as success factors? How do you navigate phases 2 and 3 successfully?
To counteract those issues, the guide provides a lot of actionable advice. Things like making sure you have clear mandates from the very top and insisting on defined roles and responsibilities for the business within the INT governance setup. This has to be driven from senior management. Implementing a formal, consistent process for engaging stakeholders right across the enterprise throughout these assessment and definition phases. Clearly explaining and actively selling the business benefits. Translate everything into business impact. Why should they care? Also, explaining the risk of not getting involved. What could go wrong for the business if they don't participate in shaping this? Using critical services or maybe major IT projects as pilots or examples to actively demonstrate the value of business involvement in EG. Show, don't just tell. Finding those believers within the business units, people who already get it and can act as internal champions. Promoting innovation and empowerment, but making it clear this happens within the defined policies and governance structure. Ensuring the people driving the change have strong sponsor support to help them get resources and overcome roadblocks. Creating actual forums for business participation, like the INT Governance Board, dedicated workshops, regular meetings. Make it easy for them to engage. Getting business reps directly involved in the high-level current state assessments. Working to build IT's credibility by highlighting successes and the good work of respected IT staff. Trying to get IT management a permanent seat at the Enterprise Executive Committee table, if possible, to ensure they have that business insight. Implementing an effective, formal business relationship management process. Actively inviting business participation. Maybe even consider short-term rotations of staff between business and IT to build bridges and understanding. If needed, maybe reorganize IT management roles or create formal links to functions like finance or HR. Thinking about the CIO role, does the person have business experience? Or maybe even consider appointing someone from the business as CIO. Using external consultants if necessary to help craft a more business-focused EG strategy. Creating specific governance roles like business relationship managers within IT. Continuing to raise governance and risk issues with the board and audit committee, always tying them back to real business issues found during assessment. Explicitly planning for the necessary culture change alongside the process definition. Ensuring you have solid enterprise-wide risk management to position IT risk within. Focusing relentlessly on translating benefits into business terms and getting commitment to achieving those benefits. And crucially, focusing on change enablement planning right from these definition stages.
That phase mapping is just so helpful, isn't it? It really shows these aren't random problems, they cluster predictably. And for phases 2 and 3, the success factors are overwhelmingly about building bridges, creating shared understanding, and proving that business relevance.
Exactly. You can't really design something fit for purpose if you don't deeply understand the business context, and
Yeah.
you won't get buy-in for that design if the business doesn't trust IT or see how it helps them.
Okay, so let's move into phase 4. What needs to be done? This is where you actually design the solutions, the specific processes, the structures, maybe the policies needed to get to that target state you just defined. What challenges does the guide flag for this design phase?
Right. Phase 4, the design work. Here, the challenges shift again more towards the practicalities of creating the solutions and dealing with the direct implications of the proposed changes. The guide lists things like a failure to really understand the current environment sufficiently before you start designing new stuff. Dealing with complexity, technical complexity, sure, but also organizational complexity, maybe different operating models across the business. Resistance to change really starts to bite here because now the changes are becoming specific and tangible, anticipating, even during design, the potential for people not to adopt the improvements once they're built. And a common one these days, the difficulty of integrating your internal governance approach with how your outsourcing partners operate and are governed.
Okay, so designing something that works and will be adopted. What about the root causes behind these design phase challenges?
Well, a lot of the root causes here really circle back to not thinking enough about the people and the organizational context while you're doing the design work, for example. Just not giving enough thought to the necessary shifts in organization, culture, or stakeholder perceptions as you design the solution. Not properly considering the good governance practices that might already exist in IT or the wider business. You risk reinventing the wheel or creating conflicts. The designers themselves might have a poor understanding of good EGJ practices. Trying to design solutions for too much all at once just gets too complex, too overwhelming. Prioritizing the design of really critical or difficult improvements before the team has built up practical experience or scored some easier wins. Having complex or multiple operating models across the company makes designing a single, consistent governance approach really tricky. And that resistance, it's partly natural. People don't like their status quo threatened, but the roots in the design phase can be things like and that resistance. It's partly natural. People don't like their status quo threatened. But the roots in the design phase can be things like people just misunderstanding what the design changes actually involve or why they're needed. And that resistance, it's partly natural. People don't like their status quo threatened. But the roots in the design phase can be things like the perception that the new design will mean more work or higher costs for them. And that resistance, it's partly natural. People don't like their status quo threatened. But the roots in the design phase can be things like reluctance to admit that current ways of working have shortcomings that the new design addresses, and that resistance. It's partly natural. People don't like their status quo threatened, but the roots in the design phase can be things like that not invented here syndrome, especially if you're trying to impose generic framework elements without tailoring them properly. And that resistance, it's partly natural. People don't like their status quo threatened. But the roots in the design phase can be things like just entrenched ways of thinking, or maybe a perceived threat to someone's role or their power base. And that resistance, it's partly natural. People don't like their status quo threatened. But the roots in the design phase can be things like individuals simply not seeing the personal benefit, the classic what's in it for me, and that resistance. It's partly natural. People don't like their status quo threatened. But the roots in the design phase can be things like sometimes external experts or even internal teams design the solutions in a vacuum without enough explanation or ensuring that the people who have to live with it feel ownership. And that resistance, it's partly natural. People don't like their status quo threatened. But the roots in the design phase can be things like not getting adequate support and direction from key stakeholders can lead to designs for policies or procedures that nobody feels responsible for. And that resistance, it's partly natural. People don't like their status quo threatened. But the roots in the design phase can be things like when dealing with outsourcing partners, there might be a fear of revealing internal weaknesses during the integration design. And that resistance, it's partly natural. People don't like their status quo threatened. But the roots in the design phase can be things like, or just failing to define and share your EG requirements clearly with the outsourced provider upfront when contracts or services are being designed. And that resistance, it's partly natural. People don't like their status quo threatened. But the roots in the design phase can be things like unclear roles and responsibilities between your org and the partner in the design processes. And that resistance, it's partly natural. People don't like their status quo threatened. But the roots in the design phase can be things like maybe just different approaches or expectations between you and the partner. And that resistance, it's partly natural. People don't like their status quo threatened. But the roots in the design phase can be things like, and sometimes the outsourcing contracts themselves might actually hinder the integration you need.
It's striking how much the human element comes through. even in the design phase. It's not just about flowcharts and technical specs. It's about designing something that fits the culture, that people can understand, adopt, and own. What are the success factors the guide suggests for tackling these Phase 4 design challenges?
The success factors for Phase 4 really emphasize involvement, planning for adoption, and practicality. Things like performing a thorough stakeholder assessment before you even start detailed design. And critically, developing a change enablement plan right alongside the technical process design. Treat designing for change as part of the solution design itself, building on existing strengths. Look for good practices already happening in IT or the business and leverage them. Don't start from scratch unless you have to. Really understanding the different groups of people who will be affected, their goals, their viewpoints, their concerns, and designing with them in mind. Keeping the design simple, realistic, manageable. Plan for phased implementation, not a massive big bang. Prioritizing which improvements to design and implement first, based on feasibility and how quickly you can show benefits. Engaging directly with the managers and the teams who will actually operate the processes you're designing. Get their input. When designing, think holistically about all the related components, skills needed, roles, responsibilities, ownership, goals, metrics, tools. Focus your awareness communications on the specific pain points and business drivers that the new designs are intended to fix. Educate managers and stakeholders, business and IT, on the changes being designed and why they matter. Using an experienced change agent, someone skilled in navigating both the organizational politics and the human side of change, can be invaluable during design. Planning to follow up after implementation to see if the benefits you designed for are actually being realized. Designing in some quick, relatively easy wins that can be rolled out early to build confidence and show value. Making generic frameworks like COBIT relevant. You have to tailor them to your specific company context during the design phase. Explicitly including change enablement planning activities during design, things like designing the training programs, the coaching approach, knowledge transfer plans, organizing communication sessions, maybe road shows, and identifying champions throughout the organization who can advocate for the changes being designed. Involving the future process owners and key stakeholders directly in the design, perhaps using pilots or demos to get feedback. Looking for and empowering champions who are enthusiastic, rather than spending all your energy trying to convert the most resistant people right away. Encouraging a management structure that clearly assigns ownership for the new processes and monitors compliance. If you used external experts for design, make sure there's a proper knowledge transfer process to the internal folks who will own it, delegating responsibility and empowering those process owners. When designing for integration with outsourcing partners, involve the suppliers, build audit rights into contracts, look for ways to integrate frameworks, address roles clearly up front, and make sure their practices align with your required governance levels.
It really sounds like Phase 4 is where the theoretical plan starts to meet the practical reality of how people will need to work differently. Designing with change enablement in mind from this stage seems absolutely crucial to avoid resistance later.
It absolutely is. This is where abstract goals turn into concrete changes in tasks, roles, and expectations. If the design doesn't account for the people who have to execute it, you're almost guaranteeing implementation hurdles.
Okay, speaking of implementation, Phase 5 is how do we get there?
Yeah.
This is the execution phase, right? Rolling out the plan you just designed in Phase 4. What challenges does the guide highlight during the actual rollout?
Yeah. Phase 5, the implementation itself. The challenges here tend to focus on execution discipline and having the actual capacity to do it. The main ones, the guide lists, are just failure to actually realize the implementation commitments. The plan isn't being followed through properly. Trying to do too much at once. Attempting to roll out too many changes or overly complex changes all at the same time. The classic problem of IT teams, and sometimes business teams too, being constantly stuck in firefighting mode, pulled away by urgent operational crises, and a lack of the necessary skills and competencies within the teams who need to implement the changes or adopt the new ways of working.
And the root causes behind these execution phase challenges, what leads to these problems during rollout.
The root causes listed here often point back to weaknesses in earlier planning phases, but also the harsh realities of the operational environment. Things like maybe the goals set earlier were just too optimistic, or the team underestimated the sheer effort involved, especially the human side, the communication needed, getting everyone speaking the same language. IT being perpetually stuck in that firefighting mode, constantly diverting resources and attention away from the planned implementation work. Just a straightforward lack of dedicated resources, people, or budget actually allocated and protected for the program, priorities may be being allocated incorrectly across all the different initiatives the company is running, the scope of the implementation starting to drift away from the original requirements, or being misinterpreted during rollout, not applying good program management disciplines like regularly reviewing the business case, tracking progress rigorously against the plan, insufficient insight into the business environment or the company's operating model during the execution phase, not understanding the organization's actual capacity to absorb change. Are there just too many other big initiatives happening at the same time? Lack of formal program planning and management? Maybe not building the foundation gradually, trying to do too much too fast? Undue pressure from stakeholders to implement changes faster than is realistic or prepared for? Failing to leverage those quick wins from earlier phases to maintain momentum and enthusiasm during the longer rollout? Reinventing the wheel during implementation instead of using existing tools or processes where possible, the underlying lack of resources or skills that actually causes the firefighting mode in the first place, existing inefficient internal processes hindering the rollout of new ones, lack of strong IT leadership really driving the execution and removing roadblocks, relying too heavily on temporary workarounds for operational problems instead of fixing the root causes, which just perpetuates the firefighting, not enough management attention and support for developing the new skills needed by the implementation and adoption teams, difficulties in recruiting or retaining the staff with the skills required for the new processes and roles.
Yeah, you can really see how weaknesses from earlier phases, maybe unrealistic planning, insufficient buy-in, not addressing operational chaos, really come home to roost during execution, don't they?
Absolutely. The cracks start to show when the pressure's on to deliver.
So what are the success factors for navigating Phase 5? How do you actually get the plan implemented successfully?
The guide's success factors for execution really focus on practicality, strong management discipline, and ensuring the organization has the capacity. It suggests managing expectations constantly within the project team and with all the stakeholders, keep communication flowing, sticking to the guiding principles that were established for the initiative, keeping the execution approach simple, realistic, practical, avoid unnecessary complexity, breaking down the overall program into smaller, manageable sub-projects or phases, implement gradually, build experience, deliver benefits incrementally, ensuring the implementation scope stays aligned with the requirements and that everyone involved shares the same understanding. Focusing implementation efforts on the changes that will most clearly demonstrate business value, making sure dedicated resources are truly allocated and protected for the program. Applying sound program management and governance principles track progress, manage risks, control scope rigorously. Leveraging existing ways of working where possible. Integrate the changes smoothly rather than creating totally separate silos. Maintaining good insight into the business environment as you execute. Applying strong management skills, leadership, problem-solving, communication to guide the teams. Getting that ongoing commitment and drive from top management to keep the EGI initiative prioritized and free up resources when needed. Actively working to address the root causes of operational firefighting to create more capacity for change. Applying tighter discipline over incoming business requests that could derail the program. Using external help strategically, maybe to fill skill gaps or help manage the operational load temporarily. Ensuring management actively supports skills development, recruitment, and retention efforts needed for the new environment. Mapping the required skills and competencies for the new roles and processes, and proactively identifying and addressing gaps. Establishing and delivering effective training and development programs.
It sounds like Phase 5 is really about that disciplined execution, but also ensuring the organization isn't trying to swallow more change than it can actually handle, especially if it's already struggling with day-to-day operations. Tackling that firefighting seems critical.
It really is. If people are drowning in urgent operational tasks, they simply don't have the bandwidth or the mental energy to effectively implement and adopt new, possibly complex ways of working.
All right, finally, Chapter 4 wraps up by looking at the last two phases together. Phase 6, did we get there? And Phase 7, how do we keep the momentum going?
Yeah, the monitoring and sustaining phases, making sure the changes stick and continue to deliver value over the long term.
What are the key challenges here in making it permanent and proving the value?
The challenges in these final phases really focus on adoption and sustainability. The guide highlights just a failure to actually adopt or consistently apply the improvements that were designed and implemented. People revert to old ways. Difficulty in actually showing or proving the benefits that were realized after the implementation dust settles, losing interest and momentum over time. That classic change fatigue sets in.
Ah, the dreaded change fatigue. And what are the root causes for these problems in the sustaining phases? Why do things sometimes fall apart after the main project is done?
The root causes, the guide lists here, really point to issues with embedding the change into the very fabric of daily work. Things like maybe the implemented solutions are just too complex or impractical for people to use easily day to day. Perhaps the solutions were developed too much in isolation, without enough input from the people who actually have to operate them. Good practices might have been copied from a framework, but not sufficiently tailored to fit the company's specific operational reality or culture. The implemented solutions aren't truly owned by the process owners or the teams using them. There's no sense of responsibility. The organization lacks clear, ongoing roles and responsibilities for maintaining and operating the new processes. Management isn't effectively mandating and supporting the change after the implementation project finishes. They move on to the next thing. Resistance to change might still be lingering, never fully addressed. People might have a poor understanding of how to actually apply the new processes or use the new tools effectively. The skills and profiles of the staff might not actually match the requirements of the new roles or processes. Goals and metrics either weren't set up effectively or they aren't working well to track ongoing performance and value. Benefits tracking just isn't consistently applied after implementation. People stop measuring. The focus shifts away from the intended benefits and value that drove the initiative in the first place. Poor communication of the successes that have been achieved post-implementation. Good news doesn't travel. Continual improvement just isn't part of the company's DNA, its culture. Management isn't actively driving for sustainable results from the changes. Resources remain entirely focused on firefighting and just keeping services running, with no capacity allocated for ongoing improvement or monitoring of the new processes. And personnel might just not be motivated. Maybe they don't see any personal benefit in continuing to follow the new way or drive further improvements.
These root causes really drive home that implementation is definitely not the finish line, is it? It feels like maybe the real work starts then, the embedding, the sustaining, the continuous improvement.
That's a great way to put it. Making the change permanent requires ongoing effort and attention.
So what are the success factors the guide suggests for making these changes truly stick in phases 6 and 7? How do you sustain momentum?
To ensure sustainability and ongoing value, the guide recommends things like making sure there's a formal transition of the improvement outcomes from a project mindset into standard, everyday, business-as-usual operations. Implementing robust performance measurement and reporting mechanisms. You need ongoing monitoring of the new processes and their impact. Setting clear, measurable, and realistic goals for what the sustained improvements are expected to achieve. Using practical performance metrics that are actually relevant to daily work and easy to track. Producing clear scorecards or dashboards that show performance against those targets. Communicating the results and the benefits gained consistently over time and always in terms of business impact. Highlighting those quick wins achieved earlier really helps build the confidence needed to sustain the effort. People remember the early successes. Ensuring management regularly communicates and reinforces the importance of the new processes and the value of good governance. Keep it visible. Communicating successes broadly to all stakeholders to maintain awareness and positive momentum. Periodically revisiting stakeholders to reaffirm their support and maybe get new ideas to fuel continued momentum. If resources are tight, try to integrate improvement activities into daily routines rather than making it a separate, burdensome task. Small, regular improvements. Focusing on regular, manageable improvement tasks rather than only big, disruptive projects. Getting external help if needed for ongoing monitoring or specialized improvement tasks, but ensuring internal teams stay engaged and retain ownership. Aligning personal reward systems, performance reviews, bonuses, incentives with targets related to the performance of the new processes or organizational improvements. Making sure the implemented solutions remain practical and relatively easy for people to apply in their jobs. Ensuring that the process owners and teams were genuinely engaged throughout the design and implementation phases, not just handed something to operate afterwards. That builds ownership. Continually tailoring good practices to fit the evolving needs and context of the enterprise. Don't let things get stale. Establishing and maintaining crystal clear roles and responsibilities for the ongoing operation and improvement of the processes. Ensuring management continues to mandate and support the change post-implementation, using enforcement if absolutely necessary to ensure compliance with key policies. Providing effective ongoing education and training as needed, especially for new hires or when processes evolve, maybe reorganizing slightly if needed to create better process ownership and accountability structures. Matching roles to individual capabilities, especially for key positions within the new governance framework.
Okay, so Chapter 4 really gives you this incredibly valuable phase-by-phase view of the potential battlefield. all the predictable challenges, the common pitfalls you might encounter on that EGA and implementation journey, but also crucially a playbook of success factors, the tactics you can use to navigate those obstacles. It's like a detailed risk assessment and mitigation plan rolled into one.
It really is. And what stands out again and again is how many of those challenges and therefore the success factors are rooted not just in technical or process design, but deeply in people, culture, leadership, communication, the human side of the equation.
Which, as you said, brings us perfectly to Chapter 5, because Chapter 5 is dedicated entirely to that critical human element. Change enablement.
Exactly. Chapter 4 repeatedly flags things like resistance to change, failure to adopt improvements, lack of buy-in as major hurdles. It basically tells you that change enablement is a key success factor. Chapter 5 then zooms in to explain what change enablement actually is and how you systematically build it into each phase of the implementation lifecycle.
It's the guide's deep dive into managing that organizational and behavioral transformation that has to happen for EGA improvements to actually take root and deliver value.
Precisely.
So Chapter 5 kicks right off in Section 5.1, hammering home the need for change enablement. Why does the guide frame this as so essential, so non-negotiable?
Well, the guide makes a really critical distinction right at the start of Chapter 5. It says, successful implementation depends on two things. Implementing the appropriate change, that's what the right processes, structures, etc.
Right.
And implementing that change in the correct way, that's the how. And the guide observes that many organizations, maybe most, focus heavily on the what. They spend a lot of time designing the perfect process.
Makes sense. That's often the tangible part.
It is. But they don't put nearly enough focus on the how, on managing the human, the behavioral, the cultural aspects. They don't systematically work to motivate stakeholders, to get their buy-in, to prepare them for the change. And the guide explicitly calls out change enablement, including stakeholder management, as one of the biggest challenges to getting EG implemented successfully.
So it's saying you can't just design it and announce it and expect it to work. You have to actively manage the people side of the transition.
That's exactly it. It defines change enablement formally as a holistic and systematic process of ensuring that relevant stakeholders are prepared and committed to the changes involved in moving from a current state to a desired future state.
Holistic and systematic. So it's a discipline, not just an afterthought.
Definitely not an afterthought. It's a core part of the implementation process itself.
What does that systematic process typically involve then? What are the key activities?
At a high level, the guide outlines several key components of change enablement. First, you need to thoroughly assess the impact of the change on the business, on the people, on all the different stakeholder groups. Understand who is affected and how. Then, you define the desired future state, but not just in terms of process maps or metrics. You define it in human and behavioral terms. What do you want people to be doing differently, and how will you measure that? Based on that assessment and vision, you build proactive change response plans. These are designed to manage the potential negative impacts like resistance or confusion, and also to maximize engagement and buy-in. These plans might include targeted training, specific communication campaigns, maybe changes to organizational design like job roles or team structures, redesigning processes to make them more user-friendly, or even updating performance management systems and incentives to align with the new ways of working. And finally, you need to continually measure progress towards that desired future state, specifically focusing on whether people are actually adopting the new behaviors.
It really sounds like you have to treat the change itself, the transition, as a project that needs its own planning and management, doesn't it?
That's a perfect way to think about it. And a common goal, the guide points out, is getting leaders from both the business side and the IT side to visibly lead by example, to demonstrate the new behaviors themselves and actively encourage their teams to adopt the new ways of working.
Can you give some concrete examples of those desired behaviors in an EGI context?
Sure. The guide gives examples like people consistently following the agreed-upon processes, even when they're under pressure or feel like taking a shortcut. Individuals actively participating in the defined EGI structures, like showing up prepared for a change approval board meeting and contributing constructively. Managers and staff personally enforcing and adhering to the defined principles, policies, or standards, like consistently following a new data security policy or using the standard process for evaluating IT investments.
Okay, those are clear behavioral examples, but how do you actually get people to do that consistently? It's often easier said than done.
Absolutely. The guide emphasizes that it's primarily about gaining their commitment, and that requires diligence, care, strong leadership, and really effective, clear, two-way communication. You have to sell the benefits, explain the why behind the change, and actively listen to and address people's concerns.
So persuasion and engagement first.
Ideally, yes. But the guide is also pragmatic. It notes that while commitment is the goal, sometimes management authority might be needed to enforce compliance with critical policies or procedures, especially if resistance persists.
Okay, so commitment preferred, enforcement as a backstop if needed. Overcoming those human, behavioral, and cultural barriers.
That sounds like the really tough part.
It often is. The guide suggests it requires establishing a common interest, making people see why the change benefits the collective, or at least doesn't harm them. It requires instilling the will to change, the motivation, and ensuring people have the ability to change the right skills, tools, resources.
Will and ability. Exactly. The guide suggests leveraging internal change management expertise if you have it, or potentially bringing in external consultants who specialize in this. And it drives the point home with that reference to the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs IT transformation.
Right, you mentioned that earlier.
Yeah, the report noted the primary challenge wasn't the technology itself, but, quote, gaining the acceptance and support of all VA personnel at all levels. It recognized that technological transformation alone isn't enough. The human factor is critical. That real-world example powerfully underscores why this whole chapter on change enablement is so vital.
Okay, understood. So let's get into the how. Section 5.2 is called Implementing Change Enablement. How does the guide structure the actual doing of change enablement within an EJITE project?
Well, just like Chapter 4 used the 7-phase implementation lifecycle to organize the challenges and success factors.
Chapter 5 does the same for change enablement activities.
Exactly. It details the specific change enablement tasks that should be happening within each of those 7 phases. This is key. It ensures change management isn't some separate parallel track, but is woven directly into the fabric of the entire improvement journey, from start to finish.
Okay, great. So let's walk through those phases again, but this time specifically looking through the lens of change enablement. Phase 1, what are the drivers? Establishing the need for change. What are the CE tasks here?
Right. Phase 1 change enablement is all about preparing the ground, understanding the human landscape, and creating that initial desire or urgency for change. The tasks include: first, integrate with any existing enterprise change management approaches your company already has. Don't reinvent the wheel or create confusion. Analyze the general organizational environment. What's the culture like? How are relationships between departments? What are the prevailing attitudes towards change? What's the management style? You need to understand the context. Figure out dependencies with other ongoing initiatives. Is the organization already saturated with change? Are there potential conflicts? Get a clear handle on the breadth and depth of the specific EGI change you're contemplating. Who will it impact, and how significantly? Identify all the different stakeholder groups at different levels, in different departments, and start thinking about their specific needs, concerns, and perspectives regarding this change. Determine what level of support, involvement, or influence you need from each group, and estimate the likely impact of the change on each group. Try to gauge the initial readiness and ability of each group to actually implement and absorb this change. Are they capable? Are they willing? Use those pain points and triggers identified in the core Phase 1 work to create a compelling wake-up call. Communicate this urgency through formal governance structures, like the INT Governance Board, to reach all key stakeholders. Actively work to eliminate complacency. Maybe use data non-compliance stats, incident reports, exception figures to highlight that the current state isn't acceptable. And finally, instill the appropriate level of urgency needed to get the change initiative off the ground.
That aligns perfectly with Chapter 4's emphasis on getting that top-level buy-in and making the case for change in Phase 1. The change enablement here is about making that case compelling, not just logically, but also emotionally and culturally, right? Connecting it to real risks and pain points.
Precisely. It's about creating that foundational desire for change, that sense of, okay, we need to do something among the key people who need to support it.
Okay, moving on to Phase 2, where are we now? And Phase 3, where do we want to be? From a change enablement perspective, the guide links Phase 2 CE tasks to forming an effective implementation team, and Phase 3 CE tasks to communicating the vision.
That's right. So for Phase 2, the change enablement focus is on building the right human infrastructure to lead and champion the change. Tasks include Assembling a core implementation team with representation from both business and IT. These folks need the right mix of knowledge, expertise, credibility, authority, and you need a strong leader for this team. The guide also notes external parties might help with objectivity or specific skills here. Proactively identifying and managing potential vested interests within the team or among stakeholders that could obstruct progress. Building trust is key. Creating an environment where this core team can actually function effectively, ensuring they have the time allocated and their involvement is prioritized. Holding workshops specifically aimed at building consensus and a shared vision within the core team itself. They need to be fully aligned and adopt their mandate. This is really important. Identifying and empowering change agents throughout the organization to work alongside the core team. This facilitates what the guide calls cascading sponsorship. This is really important. Cascading sponsorship means having sponsors at various levels who champion the vision, communicate progress, celebrate quick wins, and actively engage with resistors or cynics in their own areas. This is absolutely crucial for getting broad buy-in. This is really important. And finally, documenting the strengths identified during the main Phase 2 assessment. These can be used later in positive communications and might offer opportunities for quick wins.
That idea of cascading sponsorship and using change agents, that sounds like a really smart way to distribute the ownership and advocacy for the change, rather than it just being driven by a central team.
It is. It helps make it feel like our initiative rather than their project. Then for Phase 3, where you're defining where we want to be, the change enablement tasks shift to effectively communicating that vision. Developing a formal communication strategy. This should cover key messages, target audiences, the methods you'll use, emails, town halls, workshops, frequency, and who is responsible for delivering which messages. Translating the desired future state vision into language that resonates with the people who will be affected by it. Make it meaningful to them. The guide actually suggests using a framework here called the 4 Ps. The 4 Ps? Yeah. Purpose? Why are we doing this, Gene? Picture. What will the future look like? Plan. How are we going to get there? And part, what is my role in making this happen? It's a simple but powerful way to frame change communication. Ensuring that senior management personally delivers the key messages to underscore their importance and commitment. Remembering that communication isn't just about broadcasting information. It needs to address the logical reasons and the behavioral cultural aspects. And it absolutely must be two-way. You need mechanisms to capture feedback. And crucially, acting on the feedback you receive. Show people that their input matters and is being considered.
The 4PS purpose, picture, plan part. That's a really practical framework for communicating change effectively. Making sure everyone understands the why, the what, the how, and their own specific role in it.
Exactly. It ensures the vision isn't just an abstract concept, but something people can connect with and understand how they contribute to achieving it.
Okay. Moving on to Phase 4. What needs to be done, this is the design phase we talked about earlier.
Right.
From a change enablement standpoint, Section 5.2.4 focuses on empowering role players and identifying those crucial quick wins.
Right. So the change enablement tasks during Phase 4 are really about integrating change considerations directly into the design process and setting the stage for successful adoption. This includes actively working to get stakeholder buy-in for the solutions being designed. Engage the affected users through workshops, design reviews, maybe even pilot programs. Give them a sense of ownership by involving them in validating the design. Designing those detailed change response plans we mentioned earlier. Based on your impact assessment, figure out exactly how you'll manage the transition, what training is needed, what communications, any organizational adjustments, changes to performance management, etc. Specifically identifying potential quick wins during the design phase. Look for changes that will be visible, unambiguous, and relatively easy to implement early on. These are vital for proving the concept, building momentum, and giving people positive reinforcement. Trying to build on existing organizational strengths, identified back in Phase 2, to realize some of those quick wins, if possible. Also, looking for strong processes that exist elsewhere in the company, maybe great project management in another department, or solid financial controls that you could potentially leverage or align with. Avoid reinventing the wheel and try to sync up with broader enterprise approaches.
So during the design phase itself, you're not just creating the what's, but also actively planning the how of adoption, including lining up those early successes to build confidence.
Precisely. Designing the change process runs in parallel with designing the new governance components.
Got it. Now, Phase 5. How do we get there? The implementation phase. Section 5.2.5 discusses enabling operation and use during the actual rollout. What are the change enablement tasks here?
Okay, Phase 5 change enablement is all about supporting people through the transition as the changes are being implemented and making sure they can actually operate effectively in the new way. Key tasks include leveraging the momentum from any quick wins achieved earlier to help introduce the more widespread or perhaps more challenging changes. Build on success, communicating the success of those quick wins broadly, publicly recognize and reward the individuals and teams involved, make success visible, actually implementing the change response plans you designed in Phase 4, deliver the training, execute the communication plan, put any new organizational structures in place, ensuring that the broader base of role players, the people actually doing the work, have the necessary skills, resources, and knowledge, and critically, that they have the buy-in and commitment to use the new processes or tools. Balancing interventions aimed at groups like team training with those targeted at individuals like one-on-one coaching to address both systemic needs and personal concerns or resistance. Explicitly planning for and managing the cultural and behavioral aspects of the transition. This means helping people deal with any fears or uncertainties, clearly setting expectations for new behaviors, and guiding them through unfamiliar tasks. Clearly communicating the roles and responsibilities for how things will operate in the new business-as-usual state after the implementation. Defining how you will measure success during and immediately after implementation, including both hard business metrics and softer perception measures like user satisfaction surveys. Setting up mentoring and coaching mechanisms. Provide that hands-on support and reinforcement as people are learning and adopting the new ways of working. Closing the loop, making sure all the change requirements identified earlier are actually addressed during the implementation phase. Continuously monitoring the effectiveness of your change enablement activities themselves. Are the training programs working? Is communication clear? Take corrective action if needed.
That mentoring and coaching piece during rollout seems so important for ensuring uptake, providing that practical real-time support while people are navigating the new landscape.
It absolutely is. It reinforces the learning and helps embed the desired behaviors right there in the live environment. You can't just rely on classroom training and hope for the best.
Okay. And finally, phases 6 and 7. Did we get there? And how do we keep the momentum going?
Yes.
Section 5.2.6 covers embedding the new approaches, and 5.2.7 is about sustaining the change long-term.
Yeah.
What are the final change enablement tasks?
Right. The focus here shifts to making the change permanent and part of the ongoing culture. For Phase 6, the CE tasks concentrate on solidifying the change, actively working to ensure the new ways of working become deeply embedded in the enterprise's culture, making them the accepted norm, rooted in shared values. As you transition from the project phase to ongoing operations, consciously shape behaviors using formal organizational levers. This means actually updating job descriptions, incorporating the new expectations into performance criteria and incentive systems, and embedding the new ways into standard operating procedures, basically, operationalizing the change response plans, monitoring whether the assigned roles and responsibilities in the new structure are actually being assumed and performed consistently, tracking the adoption of the change and formally assessing the effectiveness of your change response plans. Link the results back to the original change objectives using both hard data and those perception measures. Identifying and leveraging any pockets of excellence, teams, or individuals who have really embraced the change and are getting great results, use them as internal case studies or inspirations. Maintaining your communication strategy, even post-implementation. Keep awareness high and continue to highlight successes. Ensuring open communication channels remain available for people to raise issues or suggest improvements as they settle into the new ways of working. Escalating any unresolved issues to sponsors to ensure they get addressed. If absolutely necessary, using management authority to enforce compliance with critical new policies or procedures, although ideally, commitment should be the main driver by this stage. And importantly, documenting the lessons learned specifically from the change enablement process itself to help improve future initiatives.
Embedding it into the formal HR systems, job descriptions, performance reviews, rewards, that seems like a really powerful way to make it stick beyond the initial push and project team effort.
It's critical for integrating the change into the very system of how the organization operates and recognizes contribution. Then, for Phase 7, sustaining the change, the CE tasks are all about ensuring it lasts and becomes part of a continual improvement cycle, providing conscious, ongoing reinforcement. This means continuing communication campaigns and ensuring top management commitment remains visible over the long term, formally confirming ongoing conformance to the objectives and requirements set out for the change, continuously monitoring the effectiveness of the change itself, the change enablement activities, and the level of stakeholder buy-in over time. Organizations evolve, contexts change, so you need to keep checking if the change is still effective and supported. Implementing corrective action plans based on that ongoing monitoring if you see performance slipping, resistance creeping back in, or new issues arising. Providing regular feedback on performance related to the new processes, recognizing and rewarding achievers, and publicizing successes to reinforce the value. Building on the lessons learned throughout the entire initiative to inform future improvements. Sharing the knowledge gained from the initiative broadly across the enterprise to help embed the changes and disseminate good practices.
So it's not just about sustaining this particular EG change, but really fostering a culture where improvement and the change enablement needed to support it become ongoing processes themselves.
That's the ultimate goal, weaving the discipline of change enablement into the operational fabric, ensuring that improvements aren't just one-off projects, but part of a continuously evolving and improving system.
Okay. So, wrapping up our deep dive into chapters 4 and 5 of the COBIT 2019 Implementation Guide, it feels like Chapter 4 gave us that really comprehensive, realistic look at the potential pitfalls, like a risk map for EG implementation, showing the common challenges at each stage, from getting buy-in all the way to making changes stick.
And it consistently highlighted that so many of those pitfalls are related to people, culture, communication, leadership, those human factors. It also provided concrete success factors, many of which, as we saw, pointed directly towards needing effective change management.
Which is exactly where Chapter 5 came in. It provided the framework, the specific activities, the how-to for managing that crucial human element, systematically weaving change enablement through those same implementation phases.
Yeah.
It ensures that while you're designing the right processes and structures, you're also actively preparing, supporting, and enabling the people who need to adopt and use them.
Yeah, it powerfully reinforces the guide's core message.
Right.
Successful enterprise governance of INT isn't just a technical exercise or a process design challenge. Its success is deeply, fundamentally intertwined with how well the organization can lead and navigate human behavior, build trust, gain genuine commitment, and foster a culture that embraces adoption and continuous improvement. Ignoring the behavioral dynamics detailed in Chapter 5 makes overcoming those very predictable challenges laid out in Chapter 4 significantly harder, maybe even impossible.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? When your organization tackles new governance initiatives or even major technology rollouts, is it putting as much deliberate focus, planning, and resources into the people side, the how of the change enablement, as it puts into designing the technical solution or the process itself?
The guide strongly suggests that your chances of success really hinge on getting that balance right. You need both the right solution and the right approach to getting people to adopt it.
Definitely a lot to consider there. Thanks for diving into these chapters with me today.
Always a pleasure to unpack these guides. They offer so much practical wisdom.
That's all for this deep dive. We really hope this exploration of the challenges, the success factors from Chapter 4, and that critical role of change enablement detailed in Chapter 5 gives you a clearer, more practical understanding of what it truly takes to make EG improvements successful in your own context. Until next time.